We're thankful that everyone can show. We're also very grateful to have Jaime Stein from the Pratt Institute, who is the director of the graduate programs and sustainability there, and she has been there for about 5 years. She sort of has a long list of achievements, so I'm not going to trump her on that. I'm sure she'll talk about some of that here. In addition, she's also brought some of her graduate students with her today, so for those of you who wish to talk to either Jaime or her students today, it would be sort of a nice and informal venue to do so. Without further ado,
thank you. Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much for the invitation to join me to kick off your residency. I'm very excited about this. So my name is Jaime. I direct a graduate degree in sustainability at the School of Architecture at Pratt Institute. That degree is called Sustainable Environmental Systems. By training, I'm a biochemist, and I was really interested in how the built environment impacts public health. And I specifically started looking into solid waste management, especially biohazard management. So solid waste management. And I really wanted to look at how does the built environment impact public health. So I came to New York City. There's no better place than to really look at that. So I want to define a few terms for us before we get started. Hopefully you've all sort of seen the topic of the presentation today. We're calling it Green Infrastructure, a retrospective look at how design, policy, science, and community shape our urban environment. Okay? So what I'm trying to get across there is that it's really about being interdisciplinary. We need scientists, we need policymakers, we need designers, all working together, and most importantly, we need community in order to make sure that our innovations, that our initiatives, our projects are sustainable. Okay? So let's start with the term environment. A lot of you are studying, I think, the natural environment, right? So we tend to think about the natural environment as something that we conserve, something that we try to preserve, or maybe we're exploiting our natural resources and our natural environment. For this evening, I want to try to take the built environment, that is everything that you see here, right? All of our structures, all of our infrastructure, and combine the natural environment and the built environment together. So when I say environment or urban environment, that's really what I'm talking about. Does that make sense? Okay. So I think what's really fascinating about New York City is that we are one of the densest urban environments, right? But we're right smack up against some of the most biodiverse natural environments, right? So hundreds of species of birds in Central Park, a beaver in the Bronx River, right? Seals in the harbor, right? And then all this very dense environment. So when we say environment this evening, I'm talking about those two things together. All right. Community. What do we think of when I say community? Anyone take a stab? Yeah. Thank you. When you all RSVP'd for this event, we wanted to place you in a space, in a geographic location, right? We wanted to put you on the map, right? So hopefully each one of you, maybe not, is represented by a spot on this map. And the point was really, and I know it's a little hard to see, right? So here's Manhattan, Bronx. I'm not representing the Bronx very well. Got cut off there. Brooklyn, Queens. Who's from Queens? Okay. Yeah. Brooklynites. Okay. Manhattan. Okay. Anybody from the Bronx? Yeah. Actually. Great to see you. So the notion of community is really, it can be many different things. It can be your online community. It can be your academic community. What I'm talking about is your block, what's outside your window, your walk to work. I'm talking about your race, your class. Anybody hear Spike Lee's current, most recent talk? Yeah? Okay, pretty controversial. Some feedback, what'd you hear?
Gentrification.
That was a big word. Anybody else? No, that was it? So Spike Lee, famous filmmaker, right? He came to Pratt 2 days ago, something like that, thank you. He used some pretty provocative language. He was talking about, he was really talking about Bedford-Stuyvesant and what it was like when he was growing up. And it was predominantly a low-income community of color, right? So when I say community, again, I'm talking about issues of race, class, ethnicity, And these are things that I feel like in New York City we should be having these conversations, and I'm really happy that Spike Lee was sort of able to have that platform to talk about it, and that so many people are talking about it right now. And I'm also equally happy that Spike Lee and I are going to talk about the same thing tonight. And that never happened. So one thing that he said, when I was growing up in Bed-Stuy, they didn't even remove the garbage regularly. Anybody hear that? So it's interesting, right? There's this notion that in a community that is low income and a community of color, the right for solid waste management or trash removal wasn't really there, right? Like they didn't share that benefit. It's every city dweller's right to have garbage taken off their streets, right? But in some communities, we don't see that, right? So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about community. I want you to think about your place, your community, your street, and then the environmental systems is something I'm also going to describe. But here's just a shot of some folks, doing community work. Anybody participate in the Occupy Wall Street movement? Yeah? Did you feel a sense of community there? To some degree. The 99%, the 1%, to some degree? I thought it was cool when they did like the human microphone. I thought that was neat. A great movement, organized community, right? And when organized community gets together, really exciting things happen. Okay? So, tonight I'm going to use this term environmental systems quite a bit. What I'm talking about are the systems of water, solid waste, and energy. Right? So when I say environmental systems, I'm talking about the ways that we get, manage, and really just design the use of water, energy, and the removal of waste, or the creation of waste. So that's kind of what I'm trying to get to this evening. And then I'm going to look at those systems, and we're going to think about the benefits and the burdens that are associated with those systems. Okay? So again, water, this is a wastewater treatment plant in Newtown Creek. Waste, this is a waste transfer station in Hunts Point. And I believe this is the Astoria generation station. Okay, so again, these systems of energy, water, and waste. And why are they systems? They're systems because we design them. There's an intent. They're placed in our community. They service our community. They burden our community. They're run by our community. Does that make sense? Right? So this notion that, let me start with energy. Let's go there. Right? We all know Con Edison, right? So there's a design to the system. The benefit, we have relatively reliable power, right? We can turn our lights on and off when we want. The burden, there's certain emissions associated with the burning of fossil fuels. There's noise associated with the transmission and distribution of electricity. And sometimes natural disasters happen and we lose the reliability, right? That's a system. We have designed this system, right? It has benefits and it has burdens. Solid waste management. Again, if we didn't have solid waste management, we would have a bunch of garbage in the streets and in our houses, right? Like the original intent of garbage removal was to take it out of our living spaces and workplaces, and it was really a public health initiative, right? So we relocated it, right? We didn't really we don't throw anything away, right? I think everybody here knows that, right? We just move it around, right? Does that make sense? Like even if you take some garbage over to New Jersey and you incinerate it, you just put it in the air, right? You didn't get rid of it, right? So everybody knows that about solid waste. And most recently with this winter, we've seen a lot of snow, right? Another, I got a bunch up here. You must have had not break the snow removal in your neighborhood. And also, again, a shot of a waste transfer station in Hunts Point. This system, what do? We all generate garbage, right? We put it out on our curb. The truck comes and picks it up, concentrates it in 3 neighborhoods within the city of New York. Sunset Park, Greenpoint, and the South Bronx, right? From there, it winds up in something that looks like this. Usually in open air, usually very dusty, very noisy, and very stinky, waste transfer station. Then it goes on maybe a rail, maybe a barge if you're lucky, or another truck, and it gets taken outside of the city. That's a design. That's a system. People work in that system. The Department of Sanitation employs a lot of people. We manage that system. We live next door to that system. So I'm really hammering this point of environmental system, right? So that's the one for solid waste management. There's one for water. How many of you drink your tap water? Awesome. How many of you know where our tap water comes from? Great. Anybody want to elaborate? That's kind of this image right here. I don't know if you can see it. A wonderful design, right? Upstate, we have these beautiful, pristine areas where our drinking water comes from, beautifully designed to, through gravity, come down to the city. And you open your tap and you've got the best drinking water in the country, right? That's a beautiful system. That's a great design, right? It's very well managed, and it brings us these great benefits. Okay? There's also burdens associated with that. That's what I'm trying to get to here, is that these systems, they service our communities, they burden our communities, and those benefits and burdens are not equally shared across all communities. Have I made that point? Any questions on that point? Okay. You're still with me, which is good. All right, benefits of these environmental systems. Great drinking water, exciting, use of lights in Times Square, and clean streets. This one is interesting. This is the floating lady barge. Cool. Anybody ever get on one of those? The past couple of years, it was docked in Hunts Point. Anybody know Hunts Point in the South Bronx? This was actually part of a community benefit agreement. Anybody know what that means? Basically, the wastewater treatment plant that is in Hunts Point, right along the beautiful waterfront there, it was expanding. They were going to take up more space on the waterfront. So this was part of a deal with the community. You let us expand, you agree with our proposal, and we'll bring the floating lady pool. It's good, right? They got a little bit more noise, a little bit more trucks, a little bit more odor with an expanded wastewater treatment plant, but they got this cool pool, right? So again, benefits and burdens. Okay. Trucks, electrical generation stations, waste transfer stations, all those burdens that I pointed out, they have public health impacts, right? Kids in Central Harlem, East Harlem, the South Bronx, parts of Central Brooklyn, all have high rates of asthma, right? There's a real connection there, right? Our local air quality is impacted by all of these activities, all of these burdens, and the most vulnerable populations are really seeing it. So the youth in these areas that have poor air quality. There's also impacts on the natural environment. So what we're seeing here, remember this image, I'm going to come back to it. This is actually raw sewage in the Bronx River. Okay. Yeah, it's a pretty picture, right? So yeah. All right, so now I want to make a connection. There is a connection between what we do on land and what winds up in our water bodies. Does that make sense? What we're seeing here is a device that the city's Department of Environmental Protection would call a floatables catch. Right? So what you see here is a lot of wood and debris and all sorts of stuff. This is in the Bronx River. It's actually a good thing. What they're trying to do is to kind of corral all that stuff, and then this boat comes along and picks it up, right? The point I'm trying to make with this picture is that the things that we put on the street, they wind up in our water bodies, right? Like there's a direct connection. We are a set of islands, right? I think it's so funny how when I first came to New York City in 2005, I was like, wow, this isn't a maritime city at all. I was amazed. We kind of like all turn our backs to the water and like don't really pay attention to it, right? But there is a land-water connection. Okay? Now, I used to work in Hunts Point for a great organization called Sustainable South Bronx. We were located about there. Hunts Point is what we would call an environmental justice community. Anybody know what that I was trying to make a connection earlier about the environment and issues of race and class, right? Low-income communities of color historically have more environmental burdens than wealthy white communities. Reality. We definitely see it here in New York City. Hunts Point is one of those communities. They have 15 waste transfer stations, 1 wastewater treatment plant, 1 electrical generation station, and they used to have something called the New York Organic Fertilizer Company. I'll talk about that a little bit. But a lot of environmental burdens. Another thing that exists at Hunts Point is the produce market, the meat market. Basically, I forget the percentage, but a very large percentage of our food gets trucked into Hunts Point, and then it gets distributed all throughout the city, right? So Hunts Point sees an immense amount of truck traffic. As a result, the streets are not really safe to walk around on. There's not a whole lot of green space. The air quality there is pretty bad, right? Yeah. I want to make another connection now. This idea that our local environmental quality directly impacts our health. Here's a rally. I believe this was actually in Greenpoint. This is a rally in the South Bronx. What folks were doing is community was organizing around this notion that their local air quality and their local environment was disproportionately burdened. That they were facing more burdens than other folks. And they wanted justice, right? They wanted ways to create a better place for their kids. That was really what it was about. And interestingly enough, I want to go back to this image, talk about water and water quality. But this particular operation, it was called the New York Organic Fertilizer Company. Anybody know that? Okay, so when we treat our wastewater at a wastewater treatment plant, you get solids, right? The stuff that comes off the street, the stuff that we flush down our toilets, biosolids, as well as water, right? At a wastewater treatment plant, those two things get separated. We have solids and we have treated water. The treated water goes out into our water bodies. The solids get trucked to, they used to get trucked to, this place is no longer in operation, get trucked to Hunts Point, a place called the New York Organic Fertilizer Company, NIAFCO, that's what everybody called it. Basically what they did is they cooked poop, you know, and it was stinky for 18 years. The Hunts Point community, the sweet smell of the South Bronx, it's funny but not funny, right? This is what the folks were living with. This was a rally, a wonderful group called Mothers on the Move. They organized, they sued NIAFCO. They got a little bit better at controlling the odors, but really what happened here, I want to kind of make a finer point here with I want to bring in this idea of policy. In the late 80s, really didn't start happening until the early 90s, but this thing called the Ocean Dumping Ban Act was passed. Anybody familiar with that? Anybody studying environmental law? That stuff. Basically what it said is you can no longer take biosolids and dump them in the ocean. That's what we used to do. We used to take our biosolids onto a barge, go out into the ocean, let it out. There's this old saying that EPA used to have decades ago that the solution to pollution is dilution. Anybody heard that before? The idea that you take all of this basically biosolids from New York City, you go dump it in the vast ocean, and boom, we're done, right? Great. So what happened when the Ocean Dumping Ban Act started in the early 90s is that we stopped using the ocean as a filter, and we started using people as a filter. See where I'm going here? So we took treatment of biosolids rather than putting it into the ocean so that it could affect our marine environment. We brought it on land, we processed it on land, and now toxins in our environment are directly impacting our bodies, right? So this notion, this connection of local environment and public health really starts to come through. All of that together, especially in areas like Sunset Park in Brooklyn and the South Bronx, communities started to organize around this notion called greening for breathing. Make sense? So thinking about how more green can actually help reduce public health impacts, right? So this idea that a tree can collect particulate matter from the air so that it doesn't wind up in our lungs, right? That soils and plants can cool our environment through evaporative cooling. You know, they pick up water and they blow it off and they reduce the temperature around them. The idea that more gardens, more green space makes for better communities. And that was a movement really strong in the South Bronx called Greening for Breathing, right? So this notion that community was now organizing and trying to empower themselves around what these maps are showing. Basically, in communities like Hunts Point, Morrisania, East New York, you see very little green space. So certain communities have disproportionate access to green space, the things that keeps our local air quality pristine, keeps our air quality better, places to recreate, right? You see in Hunts Point, very few green spaces. These maps are a little old. I know Hunts Point has gotten a park or two, especially with the expansion of the wastewater treatment plant. Okay, so this notion of greening for breathing, demanding the benefits of our urban environment in your community. That's really what that was all about. So again, it's kind of, we touched on ideas of science and policy, and then how community advocacy really led towards this greening movement, right? So greening for breathing kicked it off. Then you started to see, this is the logo of a place where I used to work called Sustainable South Bronx, Green the Ghetto. We thought, hey, you know, like, why can't we improve our environments? And why can't we do it and teach people how to do things? Empower folks through workforce development. Teach folks how to build green roofs. Teach folks how to do riverbank restoration. You know, go work on the Bronx River. Learn invasive species. Create a better habitat for the beaver that's up there, right? So, you know, this notion of greening for breathing, but also greening the ghetto, right? So communities that are disproportionately impacted. Let's get in there, let's do some greening, let's do some workforce development in the meantime. And this is a great green roof that was put on the Alfred E. Smith School back in 2000. Again, this idea of empowerment, education, workforce development. This is the Growing Green Academy. This is a great job training program that was run by the Horticultural Society. We started to see communities, this is a great organization in the South Bronx called Rocking the Boat. They teach youth in Hunts Point how to do boat building. And they get folks out on the water, right? So we start to see communities embracing their natural environment, wanting more green space, wanting more access to the water that surrounds us. And lo and behold, you see some policy that comes out of that. Anybody know Plan YC 2030? The city's long-term sustainability plan. We all know this guy, right? For better or for worse, he's not around anymore. So in 2007, the city came out with Plan YC 2030, its first iteration, right? A long-term sustainability plan for a greener, greater New York. Okay, it had something like 127 initiatives to make the city a better place to live for the million more people that were coming here. I don't know if we're going to see that many more people, but it was a great plan, I think, a great piece of policy that really pushed the sustainability agenda. We were one of the first big cities to come out and say, you know what, long-term sustainability planning and thinking is what we want to do. So, a direct sort of step that came out of the Greening for Breathing movement and was also joined up with the Plan YC initiatives was something called Million Trees. Anybody know this one? Anybody see any trees on their block that had that little tag that said, I'm one in a million? Yeah. You know where those trees were concentrated? Central Harlem, East Harlem, South Bronx, East New York. This was a direct initiative for all of the community advocacy around Greening for Breathing. This connection that more trees would improve our local air quality and hopefully reduce asthma rates. So you saw those trees being planted, being concentrated in those communities, those areas. So again, this notion of community advocacy and then some policy coming through with Million Trees. We also saw it in things like this. These are some renderings from the South Bronx Greenway. So this was a collaboration between the federal government and local elected officials to actually design connections along the waterfront of the South Bronx, but really this was meant to provide safe recreational space for the Hunts Point community, this specific street rendering is in Hunts Point, to get folks safely from the residential core of Hunts Point on the peninsula to the waterfront, because the views there are really beautiful. So why not allow people and give people beautiful access to these types of things? And so then Million Trees was really an on-land initiative. The Greenway was really about getting people on the water. Anybody ever gone kayaking? I'm talking about here. Oh, a couple of hands went down. Go. Anybody gone swimming? Yeah? Where?
East River, and then also down at Coney Island.
Awesome, awesome. Any other swimmers? Bronx River? I've gone in the Bronx River. Okay. That's what we're doing now, right? We're not turning our back to the water anymore. We're embracing the water now, right? We're putting high-rise condos on the water, right? We're putting Brooklyn Bridge Park, beautiful, there on the water. Okay? We are about reclaiming the water these days. And there's some advocacy that goes along with that, too. There's a great group called the Stormwater Infrastructure Matters Coalition, and they're all about meeting the #1 goal of the Clean Water Act. Anybody tell me what the Clean Water Act is? So we regulate water quality, okay, federal act. Anybody know the goal of it?
Make it swimmable and
Basically,
fishable.
isn't it to keep the rivers so people can swim in them?
Fishable, swimmable, there it is.
Yeah.
Fishable, swimmable. Anybody? Okay, I know some of you went swimming in the East River. Anybody eat something out of the East River? Is New York City an attainment of the Clean Water Act? No. Okay, all right. So this is a community-based advocacy group that is really into getting fishable, swimmable, right? And they've been doing all sorts of work around that. Back in 2008, the city said, okay, we're going to listen to you. We're going to come up with this plan. The Sustainable Stormwater Management Plan came out of Plan YC 2030. There's a little bit of a background on this. You know this guy. Jim Gennaro runs the Environmental Protection Committee for City Council. And this is a colleague at Pratt, but also chief counsel for that committee, Samara Swanson. And they're signing something within Local Law 5 that required the city to come up with a Sustainable Stormwater Management Plan. They didn't do that on their own, right? We are in non-attainment of the Clean Water Act. So we are under federal and state regulation to actually clean up our act, right? To get our water bodies to a better quality. And we're under something called a consent decree. Anybody know what that is? That basically says we as a city have to come up with long-term control plans for improving our water quality. Right? Remember that image of raw sewage coming out of the pipe? That's something called a combined sewer outfall. Anybody know what that is? Some? No? Okay.
Is it legal?
No.
That's, I would think under the Clean
Well,
Water
some
Act.
of them are permitted to a certain extent. You know, that's a great question. This group,
I'm just shocked.
right? Me too. Poop in the water. This group, swim. Their sort of phrase is nobody swims in average water, right? If you happen to be kayaking or swimming past an outfall,
Yeah.
and raw sewage ends up there, that's some stuff that's going to make you sick. It's called fecal coliform, right?
Yeah.
And when we have high concentrations of that in the water, we are in non-attainment of the Clean Water Act, right? So federal and state regulations are saying, New York City, you got to clean up your act. You have to mitigate combined sewer outfalls, all right? So that's a goal that the city has. And that's really why the city came up with this plan. You know, they put it under this nice package of we're doing sustainable stuff, but they really needed to do this, okay? So now I'm going to transition to water management. Beautiful aerial shot of Jamaica Bay. When I'm talking about water, for tonight's purposes, I'm talking about rainwater. You'll also hear me refer to it as storm water. right? That's stuff that falls from the sky. If any of you live in a coastal area and you lived here during Superstorm Sandy, you maybe saw a different type of water, right? That's coastal surge, different water. That's salty water, right? I'm talking about fresh water that falls from the sky, fresh water that falls from the sky, right? There's also drinking water, we can talk about that. There's also wastewater, but for tonight's purposes, I'm going to talk about rainwater. Okay? Here's a typical shot of New York City, right? What do we see? We see a lot of concrete, we see a lot of pavement, we see a lot of glass, we see a lot of steel. What happens when rain hits concrete, steel, glass? It runs off, right? There's no absorption here, okay? Combined sewer outfalls. Okay. When you are in a dense urban space like New York City, where there is immense amounts of what we call impervious surface, right? These are surfaces that water runs off of them. You don't soak up any water, right? All of these little red dots, all along, again, Manhattan, Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, all of those red dots represent one of those pipes that I showed you, right? An outfall location. There's a design to this, okay? The city has 14 wastewater treatment plants. We also have something called a combined sewer system. What that means is anything you flush, anything that comes out of your sink, anything that comes out of your shower drain, mixes with any rainwater that makes its way into a sewer, right? And it's one pipe, and that pipe can only handle so much, right? And that pipe is going to the wastewater treatment plant. But when we get a wet weather event, when we get some rain, that rainwater will actually overload the pipe. So rather than raw sewage backing up into our homes or into our places of work, or rather than overloading the wastewater treatment plant, it will outfall. It's a release valve. Makes perfect sense. Nice design, right? The variable there is rain, okay? The variable there is rain. So in a combined sewer system, we do a really good job during dry weather in treating all the stuff that comes out of our toilets and our sinks and our showers and our workplaces. We got that. The thing that we don't have is rainwater, okay? So, how do you manage rainwater? The way that it's typically done is to build these gigantic wastewater treatment plants. But we're a dense urban environment. You can't keep expanding, right? Like, you're only going to have so much space. And we are now faced with the impacts of climate change, which for New York City really means more wet weather events. More rain is coming, right? So we can't really expand to be able to handle that type of wet weather at our wastewater treatment plants. And then typically you'll see in developments that have this space, they'll put in these big tanks, right? Those tanks are really meant to just capture a ton of water and hold it there for a little bit and then release it back into the system. Here's another project that the city completed in 2011. Gigantic tank at Pettergate Basin. They really just dug this gigantic steel tank that could hold millions of gallons of water, and they said, oh, look, isn't this great? We're mitigating combined sewer outflows to Jamaica Bay. But what else is it doing? Is it greening for breathing? No. Is it increasing biodiversity? No. Is it doing anything on dry weather days? There are alternatives, right? There are innovative solutions that we can arrive at if we think about systems design and we incorporate green infrastructure. Okay? So what do those innovations look like? Rather than seeing so much glass and steel and concrete, how do we use the spaces that we have to now absorb that rain before it makes its way into the combined sewer system? Right? Rather than building huge tanks, why don't we create green roofs, green walls? Cool stuff, right? It looks much prettier than Pettergate Basin. But in all honesty, all of these things have great co-benefits as well, right? That's why so many folks that are advocating for stormwater and water quality are such advocates of green infrastructure. Not only do we have aesthetic beauty here, we have increased biodiversity. We have what's called mitigation of the urban heat island effect. Anybody know what I mean when I say that? Want to help me out?
Sure. So you might notice that the temperature in the city is always higher than the temperature out in the country. And the reason why is that you don't have all those green things transpire. So they absorb heat, they bring the water up through their plant, and then they shoot it out into the atmosphere and it cools off. You don't get that when you have nothing but concrete, glass, and steel.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
So you get this bad heat island around every city.
Yeah, which is particularly important. I mean, I want to stress a lot of our talk now about climate change and resiliency is really focused on water because we just survived Superstorm Sandy. But the real impact in New York City is going to be really intense heat and days and days of intense heat, right? So I know you guys have experienced the city on like a late day in August and 2 or 3 90-degree weather days, and you're just dying because the concrete is now emitting heat. And you go to Central Park, or you go to Prospect Park, and it's a little bit cooler, you get a little respite from it. That's kind of the point, right? Mm-hmm. Is that we can manage our rainwater, but we can also do it in a way that provides us with other benefits. And it's a way to learn about things. It's a way to connect people to the ecology, to the environment. Here's another colleague, Paul Mankiewicz. He's been doing green infrastructure work for decades. He's the guy who said to Mayor Bloomberg, you know what, you should start putting oyster reefs in the city to improve your water homes. Right? Here he is talking to a group of students on a green roof that he designed in Gowanus. We saw some more policy movements. It really started in the Parks Department. Again, sort of like taking this notion of green infrastructure and saying, you know what, we should be doing that everywhere we can do it. And then the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, which is the city agency that controls our drinking water and our wastewater, they put out this great plan, right, the Green Infrastructure Plan. And the only way that this was possible is that consent decree that I mentioned earlier, the thing where we have to mitigate combined sewer outfall, it was amended. And the amendment allowed for green infrastructure, right? So it said, you know what, you can use green infrastructure. And when I say green infrastructure, I mean the use of plants and soils to capture and hold rainwater, right? That's what I mean, real simple. And the feds and New York State said, you know what, we'll let you do green infrastructure to do that. So here you see an example, an expanded tree pit. Here's a couple more examples. This one actually butts out into the street. Have you ever been on the street when it's raining? All streets are kind of graded this way so that water runs towards the curb. Then you see like the stream of water, right, going down towards the sewer. This is an intervention. That stream of water is coming this way, and boom, it's going to go into all these plants, and it's going to saturate all of this soil before it makes its way into the sewer system. Right? So that variable of rain, the thing that we can sort of now control with these interventions, so now we will get less combined sewer outfall. That's really the point of the Green Infrastructure Plan. So the city is going like crazy in areas where they can, streets and sidewalks, right? So here's another couple of examples. These are actually designed, it's a larger tree pit than you usually see. There's structural soil as well as some aggregate down here below grade, and that can capture and hold a lot more water. And then it'll hold it so that these plants, just like this lady was saying in the back, will take it up in their roots and evapotranspire, and they'll cool the surrounding environment. Right? There's a couple different iterations of this. Some permeable pavers and a tree pit. So the city did an analysis where they said, okay, what can we control? The city of New York can control sidewalks and streets, and they can do these interventions in sidewalks and streets. This is maybe a little fuzzy, but this other existing development, this is private property, right? The city can't tell you what to do in terms of water collection, not yet, anyways, on private property. So they came up with a way to incentivize folks to do green infrastructure on private property. Okay? So now I'm going to totally segue into the work that we're doing at Pratt around green infrastructure. And so now I've left sort of the community discussion and the environmental systems discussion, and yeah, you can take a break. It's a long one. And now we're getting into how is the city incentivizing us to do these projects on private property. They came out with something called a green infrastructure grant. and they're willing to put about $1.4 billion into green infrastructure in the city. And so far, they've invested about $12 million in grants to private property owners that will do green infrastructure projects. Yep.
My parents own a home,
Mhm.
and the city came by and planted trees on the grass. Is that
Oh, yeah?
part of it? Like, yeah, just did it.
Wow.
Nice.
Now, was that like on your sidewalk?
Like, we have the sidewalk and then there's grass on the other side.
Oh, interesting.
Your spot. But there's 2 trees that are from the city. And the city comes by and waters them.
That's great. So I think that area is considered the public right-of-way, or like the street and the sidewalk.
Mhm.
But if your parents have a pretty good roof, you could put forth an application to this grant and try to get a green roof. Okay? The city also did something else. In addition to the Green Infrastructure Grant Program, they also have a green roof tax abatement. Does anybody know about that? A couple of years ago, it came out. And really what it was meant to do was to incentivize private property owners to put green roofs on their properties. And you could get a tax abatement of $4.50 per square foot of green roof. There were all sorts of complications in getting the Department of Buildings to sign off on the permit. Basically, like 5 grantees were awarded. It was kind of a failure. I'll say it. I mean, I helped write the legislation, but I'll say it. It's kind of a failure. But it's now back. Governor Cuomo signed it. It's now sitting in City Council, and they're making some rules that will help, hopefully, expedite the process that will make it easier for the gentleman in the back to get a green roof on his parents' house. So at Pratt, we have this lovely campus. Please come visit us in the Clinton Hill part of Brooklyn. Lots of green space there. Lots of wonderful people that have helped do these projects, students and faculty. Okay, so there's an aerial of our campus. We basically wrote a grant that said we would do 2 things. We put a green roof over here on North Hall, and we retrofit the parking lot that's on the Calvin Classen Ave. So if you guys ever go there, definitely check it out. We wrote that grant in 2012. The grant was a collaborative process between myself and some students, as well as the people that run the facilities and the buildings at the school. So it was a really kind of an interdisciplinary and collaborative effort. Here's the parking lot. These are the existing conditions. This parking lot was paved with permeable pavement about 15 years ago. Permeable pavement basically has a lot of pore space in it so that water can seep down through it. You see that there's no more water seeping down through this. It wasn't maintained. We never vacuumed it, so it silted all up. No more pore space. And so now I know, right? So this is a failed green infrastructure project, basically, is what it is now. And now when it rains, you just get a pond. Okay? Pretty unuseful. So,
Can you fix it?
yes. So, another part of what we like to do around green infrastructure is we like to hold these community workshops, right? With people doing really innovative stuff. So this woman right here, her name's Liz Berry. She runs something called Public Lab. Definitely check them out. They're very cool. They have this software that they've created. There are a bunch of techies that like make software and do all cool stuff. And it's an aerial mapping software. So basically, we raised a bunch of balloons, black and gold for Pratt colors, filled them with helium, raised them about 250 feet in the air, and we had a camera, a digital camera, hanging from the balloons. And we hacked the camera so that it would take pictures every 6 seconds. And then their software helped us knit together our own map. This group was actually the first group to get an aerial view of the plume in the Gulf Coast oil spill. They went out on a little boat, raised their balloon up 300 feet in the air with their hacked camera, and they took pictures, and we actually got to see how big that plume was. So really exciting work, and we had them come and help us with this aerial image of the parking lot. This is a dry weather spell, but you can actually see right here, right? You can kind of see the pond that's created when it rains. So here's our intervention, right? We didn't lose a single parking spot. We're capturing 68,000 gallons of water off of this parking lot, and we're doing it through, we're not regrading either, we're not repaving. We're cutting these sections here, placing in permeable pavers, again, so something that allows rain to go down into the ground. Any of the stuff that runs off of the asphalt will make its way into these series of bioswales. These are really cool trenches that convey water. Any of the overflow will wind up in this rain garden. This beautiful rendering was done by Marcel, who's sitting in the back there. So again, so we fixed it, right? It's not built yet. We're going to build it in the spring. So come back and see me in a year and we'll see if we actually fixed it. I have full faith that we did. Here's another shot. Really just meant to show you the conveyance of water in these trenches towards the bioswale. Right? So we took a systems-based approach, right? We just, go ahead, sir.
How do you stop that one having the same issues as the previous one?
Sure. Oh, you mean like,
silting?
yeah. So the beauty of natural systems, plants and soils, is that they maintain themselves, pretty much. However, each semester, we have a series of fellowships at Pratt, where students get scholarship dollars to work with me on these projects. They're the Green Infrastructure Fellows, and they will help to maintain this. Because just like those expanded tree pits and the bioswales, you need to actually go and clear out debris, or they won't function properly. So I love when people say to me, well, you know, large gray infrastructure projects like Hattergate Basin, that huge detention tank, or expanding wastewater treatment plants, they create jobs. Sure they do. They create jobs in construction, right? This creates jobs in construction. This also creates jobs in maintenance, right? So this notion of workforce development around green infrastructure is something that I feel like we need to be talking about a little bit more. So yeah, we're hoping to completely mitigate that ponding that we saw in this earlier, and we'll start building this shortly. So hopefully it'll function pretty well. And here's our rain garden, and we're actually going to be able to hold some water beneath the rain garden and provide a solar power irrigation pump. Take some water back out and irrigate the rest of the space. Here's our green roof. Well, here's our roof before greening. You'll see we get some ponding water on the rooftop. This will be a 5,400 square foot green roof. We're going to capture about 10,000 gallons of water. Is that about right, Marcel? This is on top of our cafeteria. The best thing about this project is that we put the design in the classroom, right? We had students work with our director of facilities, so the guy that basically runs all of the physical plant at Pratt. We put them in the room with the contractors, and we all got together and came up with these really awesome designs, right? So now there's ownership. Students are engaged in these projects. We're talking about water features, we're talking about urban agriculture, you know, a learning classroom, because there's actually these great windows that look down onto the roof. We're talking about bringing more biodiversity to Pratt's campus. Here's a few more shots of the section, maybe some cool hydroponics. And here's a rendering of what the design will actually look like. Again, there's some green infrastructure fellows helping to maintain everything. An interesting thing about this particular project, why this is innovative, right? So the parking lot was innovative because we didn't lose any parking spaces, and we're going to capture a ton of water, right? This one is innovative because we've actually, you can't really see it, but we're going to be capturing water, and where you see this larger plant growth, we've created these little swales on the rooftop that will actually hold water there, right? If any of you have looked at a section of a green roof, anybody? It's a bunch of different layers. One of the layers at the very bottom is a drainage mat. That's a good or bad thing, just depending on how you want to look at it. But what happens there is that water doesn't really hold on the roof. It doesn't stay there. It'll make its way into the drainage mat, and it'll run out the drain. So what we're doing is we've actually, you can't see it, but we've parsed out this roof. Some spaces have drainage mats, some don't. What we really want to do, and the city has given us some money to do it, and students are working on a plan now, is we want to put in a bunch of monitoring equipment. So like sensors that test soil moisture and flow and evapotranspiration and all that great science stuff. And we want to get a real-time map of water. You know, what's going on here when it rains? What does it look like? And we're hoping to really make the invisible processes of green infrastructure more visible. Does that make sense? We want to do that in the parking lot too. Like that parking lot is right on the corner. There's a bus station, there's a bunch of housing, there's a commercial corridor, there's a school. People are gonna pass that and they're gonna go, wow, what's that? And we need some form of signage to help people understand what's really going on there.
With that kind of setup, how deep is the root network?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we are using a patented soil by Paul Makewitz. It's called Gaia soil. He's a professor at Pratt. And it's special because it's ultra lightweight. It actually has pieces of recycled styrofoam in it. So it has an immense amount of porosity, so space for water to get in there. But it's only 25 pounds per square foot, completely saturated. And we have areas that will be 4 inches, Marcel, and 6 inches.
Yeah.
So we're dividing it up. And the trick about not having a drainage, so if you take that away, then the root structure actually almost forms carpet. And it will just get in there, and all that water that's standing on the roof, it'll basically cause, I mean, Paul could talk about this so much better, but within 4 inches of soil, you actually get a lot of growth because of all of that root structure that's replacing the drainage bed. So we're hoping to see that. And we're actually, you know, part of the green infrastructure grant, what the city is doing is they're opening up these possibilities to innovators. They're opening up the opportunity for people that aren't in this realm of stormwater management to think about really creative things that you can do. And they're hoping that out of that creativity, out of that interdisciplinary sort of act of coming up with these cool projects, that they're gonna learn a few things too, right? So that's what we're hoping, right? Wouldn't it be cool if our parking lot became a model for all of New York City's parking lots, right? Wouldn't it be great if all rooftops were able to capture and hold this much water? So it's really about the city providing an opportunity for innovation to happen. Okay, so this is my last slide. We made it. Go ahead.
Yes, so it's 25 pounds per square foot, but then there's a depth.
I
really
believe
it's a
that's
volume.
4 inches.
4 inches?
You're right. Wow, you should meet Paul. You know the
I'd like
volumetric
to.
calculations. Yeah, he's great.
Well,
I
let's
actually
talk
wish
with you then.
he was here. So Paul actually had a hand in this design. This is the Bronx River House, soon to be built. Okay, so I want to kind of go back to that earlier discussion I was having about community, particularly communities that have a disproportionate burden, or actually have disproportionate burdens placed on them. And you know, what can really happen when you innovate on an existing process, right? Like, we could put a boathouse on the Bronx River, but instead we're putting this beautiful ecological system with solar towers, all sorts of green infrastructure, all sorts of stormwater management that's happening there. And this work was done in an interdisciplinary way, right? It was done with scientists. Paul Makewitz, he's a scientist, he's an ecologist. It was done with designers, and it was done with policymakers, right? This is being built by the Parks and Urban. Okay? So this notion that when you combine science, policy, and design, and this was also done in a participatory way with community groups in the South Bronx, right? And they got to see what they wanted in this design. So it's truly an innovation and a sustainable project because you had all of those disciplines working together and engaging community. So I guess in closing, I would say that, you know, as you embark on your residency over the next couple of days, and as you go on to do whatever environmental studies or studies you might be thinking about, you know, please do remember that the real true innovation happens when we do interdisciplinary things and when we engage community. Possibly the most interesting thing that we can do as practitioners is really to involve community so that our projects are long-lasting. With that, I really want to thank my students Gina, Trang, and Jose, who put together this beautiful presentation. Thank you for your time.
So I know some of you guys have asked questions throughout, but if anyone does have any additional questions, if you could give us some more time.
I made a mistake, or I don't know how it happened.
What happened? You just showed up.
I showed up, I was supposed to, my mentor, Dr. Xavier, somehow made a mistake in the timing, telling me it's going to be at 6:30, so
I can do it for you again.
Well, I love it.
Go back
You
through.
know, I love it. I would have a lot of questions. Reason being that I'm probably the only one here in this campus
Okay.
who's graduating in the fall
Fantastic.
with
Congratulations.
BMLE degree, BS degree in sustainability management,
You're kidding.
majoring in corporate social responsibility,
Wow.
triple bottom line, and I am
That's
hands-on
awesome.
with all the programs that ConAd, NYSERDA, and everybody
Oh, great.
is.
I didn't talk about that a whole lot tonight, so you didn't really miss it.
No, but I would like, you know, this is, I know it's community-based and all that.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
Anything-
And the
anything
file's
else?
on the computer, so you're more than welcome to take a look at it. But really, this evening, we talked about community. We really did. We talked about community and innovative design and how we can, go ahead.
Is this the same spot that further up there's a recycled
Yes,
cement
you
plant?
got it.
All right, great.
Mm-hmm, yep, that's it. This was actually part of the Hunts Point Greenway vision. So there was a vision plan that was done by community members, and it was really about taking the residential core of Hunts Point, if any of you know the peninsula of Hunts Point, and creating these like safe recreational corridors to the waterfront. And then this is actually right on. It's beautiful design, done by Kiss Cathcart, big architectural firm, but they engaged all in the process, and that's why it has so many of these sort of like ecological diversity or science.
Is anybody doing this sort of thing with oysters?
Paul is trying. It's a little bit harder to get the in-water infrastructure.
Yeah.
So,
We were talking about that in my group. I mean, there's
Okay.
the Kurlansky book, The Big Oysters.
right,
which was
right, sure.
The glory days of all that
Of New
good
York
stuff
City,
we used to
yeah,
have,
like-
yes.
It's just this big. Does everybody know why we were talking about oysters?
I have no clue.
No clue. Okay, great. So they're one. That's wonderful. I'm so glad that we can share this. They're actually one of nature's best filters. So they can take in an immense amount of water and filter out any of the pollutants, heavy metals, particulates, and then the water that they let out is much cleaner. So the thinking is they can be a natural filter rather than a wastewater treatment. And the idea is that you would seed oyster reefs in the most polluted waterways.
I have a question. Is there an initiative in the city to like add solar panels to the roofs of the cities? And if so, is that a conflict with the Green Roofs Initiative?
No, actually, that's a great question. So I'm going to go back a little bit, but say that we looked specifically at water. Any of the environmental systems have just as much cool innovation, advocacy, and policy behind them. So solar and solar power is something that has been a little bit hard to get started in the city. But I have heard, and maybe somebody can correct me on this, but I have heard that actually the evaporative cooling that happens on a green roof allows for the solar panel to function better. Did I make it up?
No.
Is that right? No? Okay.
May I add something to it?
Sure.
And information you wish to have, that CUNY has the institute directly devoted, one part of it to the solar energy and the wind power.
That's right, they did the solar map, I think, of the city.
Baruch College is your center to go to for any of that.
Great.
And I do have some information that falls under cogeneration.
Oh, okay.
But the focus right now from Public Service Commission of the State of New York through ConAd in 5 boroughs and Westchester is to reduce power consumption. Simply because Indian Point nuclear power plant is scheduled to be retired.
Mhm.
By June 1, 2016, they must
Yep.
reduce
Does everybody know
demand
Indian
by
Point?
700 megawatts.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And that's a
That's a lot.
huge
So
chunk.
we're kind of on the hook, right? So maybe we'll see advancements in more solar.
Sorry, just to go back to the oysters.
Sure. Oh, this is so great. I didn't even-
Moving things around, what happens to the toxins in the oysters after the filtering?
That's actually a really good point. So they will capture and hold them,
Right.
right? So, and then that little oyster will perish eventually, or something will eat it. So yeah, we're just moving it around, you could say that. But I think, actually, I don't want to speak about the same market, because I'm totally out of my realm. But I think that there are natural systems that have an ability to fix and then actually take away some of the toxicity by fixing that. Does that make sense? I don't think you're supposed to eat oysters, though, but they like that.
The oyster beds also help with stormwater surge, water
Right.
storms.
That's right. So if any of you have studied surge, like this idea of massive volumes of water with a bunch of pressure behind them, if you can put in physical structures that break up that sort of velocity and that movement, then you can actually mitigate some of your storm surge.
Also, as far as green roofs, you lower the energy footprint of not only the interior of the building, but that 4 inch of soil as an R value, an insulating value, to actually helps cool and or contain heat
That's
inside
great.
the building.
And I've also heard that if you have a system on, the architects in the room can help out with this one, but I guess if you put a kind of a system that takes air from outside and then brings it in to either heat it or cool it, that actually air that you take right off of a green roof is cooler, so then you don't have to cool it as much for your building. That's another sort of synergy. You have a question?
Do corporations have incentives for green infrastructure?
In the city of New York, I don't think so, but other places they probably do. And it also depends on what you call green infrastructure, and I know you're gonna say something.
Right. Yeah. It all depends upon which program. Right now, because of the nuclear power plant being retired, there are 2 major programs that they have pushed for all corporations and buildings: commercial and industrial, power and energy efficiency. Any building that has central HVAC, they are qualified, and the only thing needed is ASHRAE level 2 or level 3 audit.
So this is where, if you had come earlier, you would have seen that when we talk about green infrastructure, we're actually talking about things that are from natural systems. So plants and soils.
I'm getting to that.
Oh, okay, so you're talking about plants and soils.
Yeah.
You're not just talking about light bulbs.
No, I'm not like that. Now, that's that, but the point I'm gonna keep pounding on this is, the second one is that, because there's huge money for corporations,
Okay.
okay? And the second one is demand reduction. And the rest of all these solar power panels, wind energy, and this, they have incentives. Anything that reduces the consumption or saves water in some ways and reduces the greenhouse gas emissions and so on and so forth, they all have some or the other incentives.
What I would really love to see in terms of incentives or advancements would be that, you know, a large development could get credits for putting some type of natural stormwater management on their property.
I have one more question.
Oh, okay.
I just was wondering about the grants for the green for gardens on top of buildings.
Yep.
It's only in New York City, I would assume.
I'm sure it's other places, but DEP's grant is specifically in New York City.
And is that for private homes only, or what about like co-op buildings?
I think it fits for any private property. There are some, you know, we definitely had some challenges, and I'd be happy to talk to you offline about what those challenges were. But they're actually reworking the program so that smaller properties could go into it. Because, I mean, for us, Pratt, I mean, we had to put a lot of upfront money just to get it started, and like writing a grant and all that stuff was sort of challenging for, you know, everyday homeowners. But yeah, it would work perfectly. You would just have to sign a 20-year deed restriction. That's part of it too. Great.
Cool. So everyone want to join me in thanking Jamie one more time. We do have a reception, provided there's still food.
Okay.
And refreshments, but please join us, and then you guys will have the opportunity to talk to our person.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, everybody.